I'm Jim Phillips, and you're listening to Townsquare Sunday. In January, new representatives and senators will move into the Capitol in Washington. Democrats will control the House, but Republicans increased their majority in the Senate during the midterm elections this past week. Here to talk about the midterm results and offer one man's opinion on what it all means is UMass Dartmouth professor of political science, Ken Manning. Professor Manning, great to have you here.
Good to be with you, Jim.
All right. We've talked for many years on the phone. The first time we've kind of met, I think, face-to-face. But considering some of the results of the midterms, is it a loss for the Republicans? I mean, I don't know. We've seen bigger changes at the midterms than we saw on Tuesday night. Would you agree with that?
We have. It was a loss for Republicans. Obviously, they lost the House of Representatives, and the Democrats, it looks like, are going to pick up at least 35 and may push up to 40 seats in the House. But they added a few seats in the Senate. The Republicans did. So in that way, I think calling it a split decision is not unfair either. The president's party tends to lose seats during midterm elections. And yet Democrats can say that we really outperformed and haven't done this well in 30-plus years. So I think both sides can look at this contest and come away with something to crow about and talk about. At the end of the day, if you look at sheer numbers, Democrats clearly picked up governor's races, state legislative seats, congressional seats, and I think they have to be very happy with how they performed on Tuesday.
All right. How would you characterize these midterm elections? There was clearly more people were voting around the country. I mean, I think that's very clear. Certainly here in Massachusetts, there was a new energy about these midterms. Like it or lump it, frankly, it was all about Donald Trump, at least in a state like Massachusetts. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. Exit polls showed that Trump clearly was on the minds of voters. This election was exceptional in that it did have higher turnout than you would typically expect for a midterm election. I don't think it quite reached presidential election year turnout rates, but still it was up. I think if you look at this election, you can see quite a bit of change. We clearly talked about the numbers where Democrats are doing better in terms of representation. You can see shifts in terms of where the parties are doing better. Democrats did especially well in the suburbs throughout the United States. Republicans, on the other hand, picked up votes in rural areas. So you can see some real change going on in terms of the partisan and geographic dynamics. And yet there's also continuity here, too, right? Most representatives were reelected. Only one-third of the Senate was up, and most of those running for reelection won their reelection bid. So it's not like we're going to wake up on January 2019 and see a completely different political world. But at the same time, you can clearly see some shifting in the political tectonic plates, if you will.
All right. Now, some Democrats have not said a great deal about what they feel should happen after January. But the president was talking about what should happen after January. In fact, I heard on Wednesday that he had called Nancy Pelosi to congratulate the Democratic Party about winning the House, and he was talking about cutting deals with the Democrats. How likely is that?
Well, there's a long custom after an election for both sides to at least give lip service, and often it is just that. To working with the other party. The reality is that when it comes to major public policy issues, the parties are very far apart from one another these days. And it's very hard to see Democrats and Republicans coming together on some of the most contentious and salient issues of the day. But that said, spending bills will have to be passed to keep the government open. There will be inevitably, reauthorization legislation that doesn't grab the headlines and requires both parties to work together. So those types of things do offer opportunity for the two parties to work together. But there, I think, is going to be plenty of gridlock and locking of horns going forward.
Do you see a lot of investigations? Do you see committees formed in the House to investigate the president, to investigate the administration's activities? What's your thought about that?
I do. I don't know that there will be a lot of special committees formed. There certainly could be, but certainly the standing committees like the House Judiciary Committee will use its authority to subpoena documents, to gather information, to ask questions of, say, the Justice Department. And this will mark a serious departure from the way things have been over the last couple years. So, yes, I certainly do see more oversight coming of the executive branch from the House of Representatives. So Republicans will likely characterize this as a witch hunt. Democrats will say that they're just doing their responsibilities under the Constitution to exercise legislative oversight. But yes, I certainly see some more contentious conflict in terms of investigations.
So more division, more for those of us who, frankly, are wishing for a calmer time where people can express their differences and we not want to go after them with a pitchfork or something. For a time where people can work things out, negotiate, diplomacy. Forget about that.
I don't know. I'd say forget about it, but yeah, I don't see this this being an era of political peace and harmony. The polarization that exists in the country is real. The divisions between the two parties are real. Trump himself is a polarizing figure. He stylistically rubs folks the wrong way. We saw that press conference on Wednesday where the president was hurling insults at a reporter. So I think your underlying presumption that we're in for more conflict and political battles is correct.
On election night, one positive, I think, we did see more women elected to Congress.
Yep.
How did that come about? It's easy to point to the Me Too movement after the president was elected and say that's how it came about, but I sense it may be further back than that.
Yeah, well, I think a couple things were going on. First of all, I think that since the election of Trump, there's very clear data that indicates that Trump is a especially polarizing figure for women. And I think that one of the reasons we saw an increase in the number of women running is that a number of women have really been very upset with the direction of the country and have decided to throw their hat in the ring and run for office. But we are also seeing the results of seeds that have been planted before. Women running for Congress, many of them have already served in electoral positions, say, at the state level. And so it kind of takes time to build those political careers. But also don't forget, I should say, the recruiting efforts of party leaders. I think Democrats did an especially good job of identifying strong candidates, many of them women, with compelling narratives, compelling stories, strong credentials. And I think that paid off for them on Election Day.
Have they done a good job of identifying candidates for president? Now, we're 2 years out. I get that. It's still a ways to go. But really, if you're going to run for president, you've got to get your eggs in order here in 2019, not wait till 2020. 2019, you've got to be ready to go. Later in the year, perhaps, but still you've got to be working on this situation. Listen, there are a number of names that have been tossed around. Are they ready to compete? Prime time.
They're ready to compete. There's no, I think, clear heir apparent. And, of course, that's often the problem for the party out of power. I think after Tuesday's election results, no one can point to one singular candidate who everyone in the party or a clear majority in the party can turn around and agree, yes, this is our person. You're right. They're going to 2019 is the year that the candidates are kind of going to have to fish or cut bait in terms of getting in the contest. It's very clear that there are certain people like, say, Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris in California, Joe Biden, who are leaning in the direction of running. There are others, say Kristen Gillibrand in New York, who seem to be on the fence, maybe Andrew Cuomo as well. In 2019, it will be the decision point. Democrats could have a very spirited contest on their hands. We saw in Texas, Beto O'Rourke, who came close to knocking off Ted Cruz, is now being talked about as a potential candidate, a very charismatic person who can really energize voters and draw a lot of energy. this is going to be an interesting and wide open contrast.
But the big question remains, can you beat the incumbent who
right.
is sitting there and who, listen, the power of incumbency is immense.
It is indeed.
Especially with the president. He cherry-picked a few races around the country, and for the most part, those he went to speak for, I think he helped them.
Incumbent presidents have a number of advantages associated with being president. And if you look at the historical records since Franklin Delano Roosevelt, only 2 incumbent presidents running for a second term, George Bush Sr. and Jimmy Carter, have lost. And in that way, you could say that Trump really kind of has an advantage, because the historical norm is for a president running for a second term to be reelected. On the other hand, what you also see from the data is that it's the economy that seems to have the most powerful predictive effect on presidential elections. And we don't know what the economy is going to look like in 2020. If the economy is doing as well as it is in 2018, I think that Trump could be a very formidable candidate for Democrats. On the other hand, if our economy slows and slips into a recession, as some economists fear, then the Republicans really could be in trouble that year. At this point, we just know that there will likely be an incumbent president running for re-election. They tend to do well, but really, ultimately, it's about the economy.
You're listening to Townsquare Sunday. My guest is political science professor Ken Manning from UMass Dartmouth. In the last few weeks, the president talked consistently about the migrant caravan that's heading toward the southern borders. And in some races, I think he used that, and he used it effectively and as a campaign tool to prod and energize conservative voters. He called it a threat. He called it a lot of things. Is it a threat? Is it something we should worry about? Now, you're not a national security expert, but you are a political expert. Is it something we should worry about?
Well, look, immigration has been an issue the country has been wrestling with for many years now. You may recall back in the George W. Bush administration, immigration was a hot-button issue. So this is now the third president in a row that has been, spending a lot of time on the issue of immigration. That said, it was very clear that this was a campaigning strategy by Trump and the Republicans. If you look at the data, it's very clear that immigration as an issue motivates Republican voters. So talking about immigration, talking about the issue of undocumented immigrants coming in the United States, really motivates Republicans, and that was clearly the strategy here. So Republicans were looking to do anything to talk about an issue that would help bring their voters to the polls on Election Day. And I do think it worked in some places. But the problem, I think, for Republicans is we saw a huge increase in turnout among folks who are turned off by that message. Latino turnout, for example, was up very sharply on Tuesday among younger voters. And while that strategy may have worked for Republicans in some places, in other places it alienated a lot of moderate suburban voters, for example. So it's a mixed bag of how effective I think ultimately that is in terms of the Republican Party's electoral success. Well,
I can't believe we're going to have another deadlock for 2 years on immigration, but likely we will. Yeah. And, it's time for Congress to kind of tackle this problem. We've been talking about it for long enough. It's time for Congress to work at it, but I don't think it's going to happen.
No, I don't think so either. And the reality is, and the reason I should say is that the parties simply fundamentally disagree on what the fixes should be. There is, I think, wide-scale agreement about problems with the immigration system, but getting a bipartisan solution simply, it's been tried for decades now, literally decades, and it just doesn't exist.
Will Nancy Pelosi be retained as Speaker of the House?
It looks like it. There's been some grumbling, obviously, among some Democrats, but she's actually a very effective campaigner for Democrats. She's raised tons of money for her party, and she has done a very good job, actually, of helping the cultivate the career of Democrats in the House. So grumbling aside among some Democrats, and of course Republicans like to make her a target of invective, I think she will be reelected as Speaker.
What do you think, Professor Manning, will be the first piece of business the Democrats will tackle after selecting a Speaker? That's probably the first. Where do we go from there?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, there's talk of some type of bipartisan compromise on infrastructure, some type of legislation that would put more money into roads, bridges, public transport, other infrastructure. If the parties could figure out some type of agreement on the pay-fors, I think that there's a possibility of that. But that said, I don't see a whole lot of opportunity for real big bipartisan policy making here. The Republicans didn't really lay out a legislative agenda in this election, nor, frankly, did the Democrats. This election really was fought on the grounds of, are you in Trump's camp, or are you not? And so I didn't hear a whole lot of talk about big policy proposals. So I don't think we're going to see a whole lot of that in the new year. And
that's really a shame, because we need some things in this country. One of them is better roads, safer bridges. These things are not luxuries; they are things that we need. And it would be a shame if those things did not get done. At least some of these things. We also need immigration reform. Right. We also need to think about, what are we going to do about guns? No one wants to touch that issue, at least on the Republican side. It's the third rail. Nobody wants to discuss it, and it's really a shame. Yeah,
there clearly are real policy challenges, as you just accurately pointed out. The problem ultimately is that the solutions to these problems really just don't find agreement among a sufficient number of elected officials in order to pass major legislation. There's just very little common ground. I say no common ground. There's very little common ground. And so the idea that we're going to tackle some of these issues that you're right, that need to be addressed, it's hard to see that happening when they just simply can't agree.
Professor Ken Manning, UMass Dartmouth, thanks for your thoughts, and thanks for coming in today.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
That's it for Townsquare Sunday this week. I'm Jim Phillips. Jason Kent and Casey Sylvia do great work every week helping us get this program on the air and on our website and Facebook. Thanks to both of them. Thank you for listening. Till next Sunday, have a great week and a wonderful Sunday.